I keep thinking about the 2016 game at Kentucky, and let me tell you why as we go on here. Georgia had gone through a tough season already. At that point, it was Kirby Smart's first season at Georgia. They had him to bus to practice every single day. They had started multiple quarterbacks. They had had a 1 point loss to Vanderbilt. They had had a miracle loss to Tennessee. They had been pretty much, I don't know, thoroughly defeated by the Gators in Jacksonville. And then, blown out by Ole Miss in 2016 at the beginning of the season. A very hot day in Oxford. And that night in Kentucky, the season was on the line for Georgia. And this was coming after a 10-3 season with Mark Richt. It was coming after, it was a continuation of many years of frustration at Georgia. And at that point, Georgia needed a win really bad. And there was a tight game. They were narrowly favored. And at the end of the game, Georgia survives. Kentucky being within the 10-yard line of scoring. They have to kick a field goal to tie the game rather than take the lead. Jacob Eason takes the Dogs down the field to win the game. Rodrigo Blankenship makes the game-winning field goal as time expires. And Kentucky can't stop Georgia all along the way. And the celebration was not an insignificant one that night in Lexington. And it felt like the beginning of the modern era of Georgia football. That's what it felt like that night. And Kirby Smart's talking now to Paul Feinbaum as I fast forward 8 years. And he says, if you take the joy and suck the joy out of winning, it makes your career shorter. And it says, if you're not careful, you'll find no joy in winning. And this is something that Steve Spurrier complained about at Florida. It's something that Dabo Swinney, who complains about everything, complains about a lot at Clemson. It's something I think that caused Nick Saban to retire. But I think at Georgia right now, the level of success, I think, is pretty evident. But what we're not yet seeing, maybe we're seeing it, but you can feel it. I can feel it. Because when you've done what I've done for almost a quarter century, sometimes wins aren't good enough. Sometimes the only thing that people want to see is a bloodbath. That's not how sports work, Think about the Ohio State win in 22. Think about the Mizzou win in 22. Think about what led to this. I mean, they lost to Alabama 2 games before this. It's Kelee Ringo's signed book. I got the link down below. Make sure you're picking that up before I run out of them. I don't have, when I'm out of those, I'm out of those. That's it. But everybody, at Georgia now, it seems like the Dogs are rated on a curve. And listen, I do it too. And I think many people do it. Yeah, they didn't look that great. I remember there's a friend of mine, I'm not going to say even where he works now, but he's an Auburn guy. And, they won the national championship in 2010. And after I saw him maybe a few days later, he said, yeah, he really didn't play well. And I was like, who cares? They won the national championship. What's the difference? Did Georgia play really well? Did Georgia play really well in this game? They did not. They played a really great fourth quarter. They did not play a really great game. Did Georgia play great against TCU? Yeah, they did. They played a great game that night. They played a great game against Michigan. They played a pretty good game against Ohio State. But the point is they won all 4 of the games. And, thinking back to Lexington, I remember that was a night game. There were places to eat, unlike in Charlotte. There were places to eat after a very late game. And, you could see the joy. I have photos from it. I'll get them on the screen. But I have, that night was a very memorable night, not just because of how tight the game was, but the pressure going into that game for Georgia and Kirby. I mean, it wasn't a great season, as I said, But that's when you could really see the joy of winning for the Georgia Bulldogs under Kirby Smart. That wasn't. I'm looking at that. I'm looking at every single game here. The Carolina game was tight at the beginning of the season. Nicholls State was super tight. They win on the final play of the game against Nicholls. Missouri, they got blown out by Ole Miss. They lose on the last play of the game in Tennessee. That Hurricane game was really odd against South Carolina. It looks like their season, though, it's looking like they're like, hey, man, we're going to go like 7. We're going to get to Jacksonville 7-2. And then they lose to Vanderbilt. Like, that was a really bad loss. And just bad. They just got, I wouldn't say they got dominated by Florida, but the game wasn't, you didn't have a lot of confusion as to who was going to win that game. And so that's why, Kentucky, they came into that thing with 4 losses. I think they were 4-5 or 5-4 or 4-4, whatever it was. And it was tight. And I'm trying to get on the screen here. People, I'm going to put it on screen now. And these are not all post-game images. And Kirby looks a lot younger here, man. Golly. I guess I would too. But Kirby looks a lot younger. Look how young he looks there. That's the hair. I got that problem right now. Look how happy he is. Shane Beamer on the left over there. This is after Georgia, Kentucky. Well, that was Shane Beamer on the left. That's Mo on the right. Aaron Davis on the right there. They were really happy. Now, some of these are just game photos, so I apologize. But there's a shot of Jacob Eason walking off, and I'll go back. It's Kirby's eye. I'm just now seeing that for the first time. Something's wrong. I'm telling you, man, they say there is definitely something going on with his eye that night. Look at that. But anyway, here it is with Jacob. And Jacob had a tough night that night. It was the usual difficult road game in the SEC. My connection could be better. But they were so excited after that game. And it wasn't just on the field. It was everywhere. Here, this is the shot that I always think about, okay? These are 2 Georgia quarterbacks, Mike Cavan and Jacob Eason. And I think at that moment, they felt like Jacob had really grown up. And I say all that, this is the joy of winning right here. And this is never going to get recaptured. This is never, this time at Georgia is gone. It will never come back because this team, here's Jake. This is Wes's image actually. You cannot see Rodrigo, but Jacob was trying to hug the guys after. There it is. That's my shot. Jeb Blazevich on the right, Harris, Lamont. You've got Cublano in there. So many guys on the ground, but it was a 25-yard kick. It was a great moment. Boy, the kid from Kentucky really got up high. If that ball was low at all, that ball gets kicked. But here's your boy really getting introduced to society. Nobody had seen him really before this. And he just took over with those glasses. It was something else. But that was a time that, a tight win in Kentucky this year, that would not get celebrated. It would not get celebrated. People will wonder what's wrong. And, I think everybody's got it. It's got to be in perspective. Everything's got to be in perspective. It's got to be, are they playing the right way? Were they tested and it's just what it was? Where are we really at with the particular game that we're witnessing? And I think for Georgia, there still has to be joy in winning. I remember after the 12 Tennessee game, Mike Bobo had called a really, I don't know if it was a masterful game, but they scored, what did they score? 30, 40, almost 40 points on Tennessee that day? 35 to 20, 32, I think it was. So they scored a bunch of points on Tennessee, and people were like, that was not a great Tennessee team, but they could score. And, Mike was like, I'm not going to apologize for beating Tennessee, and they shouldn't. You shouldn't. You should not apologize for winning tight games on the road in the SEC or winning any game on the road, but particularly SEC games. I mean, think back to last season. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so you'll have to excuse me if I make mistakes. They had to play at Auburn, tight game. They had to play at Vanderbilt. That game was not tight, but it wasn't a blowout. They had to play at Tennessee. That was a blowout. But it was a slow motion blowout. I'm trying to think of the other road game, and y'all will know it off the top of your head, and I can't think of it right now. But it is hard to play on the road. You know, when they played on the road at Mississippi State in 22, man, that was not a work of art. That was not a great game. They didn't play great in that game, but they won. And you know, they won. You know, the joy of winning should not go away. When you're only guaranteed 12 games a season, and you only get to, you know, if you're healthy, get to play in those 12 games, that's all you're guaranteed. That's not a lot of games for all the work that you do. And I think that when you win, even if you don't play well, it should be celebrated. You can already see right now that the Clemson line is going to keep going higher. And that game for Georgia, obviously, if they get upset, people will lose their mind. But if they don't win in a way that is satisfactory to the fan base, people will have a problem. That's a mistake. Wins always matter.